Sometimes in life, the most extraordinary things are also the most ordinary, plain Jane. But 377 behind me is a pretty extraordinary engine, and we're going to get into that today. Hi, this is Trevor from History on the Move, and 377 here, the C&O 460, has a great story to tell us, and really one that almost never was. We'll get into that here on this episode. So, how did 377 come to be 377? And more importantly, why was it extraordinary? But before we get into that, we have to talk about why was it ordinary? Well, here's 1902, and there's a little railroad out in the middle of Indiana called the Cincinnati, Richmond, and Muncie Railroad. And they place a order with, at the time, it's called Burnham, Williams and Company. This is a predecessor to what we now know as Baldwin Locomotive Works. And they place an order for 13 locomotives, and one of them happens to be this guy behind me, but it's numbered 108. So 108 comes out in 1902, and unfortunately the CR&M didn't really do too well. They had a very short shelf life there in 1902, and they eventually went belly up, and they kind of merged into Chicago, Cincinnati, and the Louisville Railroad, the CC&L. And that railroad lasts from 1902 to 1909, and eventually they went bankrupt, and they were bought out by the C&O in the mid to later parts of 1909. But at this point, 108 at that time is still working in Indiana. And as the C&O buys out CC&L, C&O eventually renumbers this thing to 1108 to fit into their scheme. And at that time, it's still doing the workaday mostly mixed daily trains. You know, string of boxcars behind it, and maybe like a combine and a passenger coach. And eventually it gets renumbered into what we see now behind me, 377 in 1923. C&O says, okay, time to change this number. And it was eventually transferred to the Clifton Forge home base, the roundhouse there, in the early 1930s. And it worked, a lot of times it ran between Clifton Forge and Lynchburg. But eventually it would come to work mostly at the Craig Valley branch. And that runs from Eagle Rock out to New Castle, Virginia. And that's to me, is a cool little run. It's very, very branch. It's about as branch line as you could get. And that was what here 377 was excelled at. And that's essentially why the C&O put this locomotive in the Craig Valley branch, was because it excelled at pulling mixed daily trains and doing short little runs and things like that. So in the years while it's at the Craig Valley, 377 has its only remaining brethren with it, 378. And these two are, as I was reading, were kept hot at all times. One of them is, if one of them's down for a boiler wash, the other one's in service, and vice versa, as this kind of goes along. Now, eventually, these two are retired in 1952. The C&O, at that time, they said, okay, there's these things called diesels that are coming online. And Alco actually built a number of S2s for the Craig Valley branch, and that's what would ultimately replace 377. Sadly, though, 377 had a pretty good run, and what ultimately would happen was the C&O was looking at the bridges and the other infrastructure at the time and saying, actually, the diesels are too heavy for this thing. Let's keep the steam engines going for a while. And eventually they spent a ton of money, the C&O did, on revitalizing and beefing up the bridges and the infrastructure on that Craig Valley branch. And so eventually it was time for 377 and 378 to go to the giant scrap metal pile in the sky, and that's when these Alco diesels came in. But our story does not end there. We'll pick it up on the other side, but I insert a little segment here where my great friend Chris France gave me a good walk around of 377 and really explains how this thing moves. So I hope you enjoyed that little historical segment about 377. Now, I have the utmost privilege of my good friend Chris France back here again to help me. He's going to walk through what it is that makes 377 move, because the neat part is, if you don't know anything about Chris, he does run plenty. Your resume is ridiculous. I am not worthy.
Not really.
God's sakes, man, take a humble brag.
It's a resume.
He runs steam up at the Valley Railroad in Connecticut. I've gotten to visit him a few times. You've run the Mason, the Lafayette, the Tom Thumb, and your beloved number 4, the St. Elizabeth.
That's true.
There's nobody I can think of any better to walk us through a steam engine like this. So, Chris, we'll start with the cab, and then we'll just work our way down to the valve gear and all that good stuff.
Okay.
All right. Chris, walk us through here. The engineer. Let's start with the engineer side.
Okay. Well, first you got your reverser right here, which is obviously how you control whether you're going forward or reverse, and adjusting the timing of the valves after that. All the way forward is forward, all the way back is reverse, and then as you get going and need a little less torque and more just keeping the momentum of the train moving, you kind of back off the reverser a little bit. Your throttle's up here, which is going to control how much steam you're feeding down to your cylinders. You've got your brake stand here. You've got your cylinder cock controls here, which this engine would have had air-powered cylinder cocks to open up to release some of the pressure from the cylinders. Sanders right here, forward or backward. And then you've got your engineer side injector up there. You've obviously got your whistle cord right here, and your brake gauges and steam gauge right there. The steam gauge is obviously the larger of the three.
Right there, steam, and these two are brake, you said?
And the two smaller ones are your brake gauges.
Okay, and what's the difference in the two brake gauges? What is one versus the other?
Well, one is your main reservoir and your equalizing reservoir, and the other is going to show you the braking force. This is an older setup, so it doesn't necessarily have the... normally you'd have one that would show you your brake pipe pressure and your steam cylinder, or your your locomotive cylinder pressure. Mm-hmm. This one I think is just set up for locomotive cylinder pressure.
This 377 is a pretty basic steam engine.
It is, and it's from a time where a lot of things that are now mandated were not necessarily mandated. So it has a few less appliances than you would find on something running today.
And this guy here,
that's your hydrostatic lubricator. So that uses a setup to feed oil into a steam chamber. Well, it's a water chamber that feeds it up, and then that gets turned into steam, and then it gets blasted down through a set of lines to different points on the locomotive to lubricate them.
Gotcha.
It's kind of tricky setup, but it actually works fairly well once they're set and running. You've got your tricocks, which is, before sight glasses, how they would monitor the water level in the boiler. And then you've got sight glasses on both sides as well.
Are we guessing these are retro? Because this was built in 1902.
I do not know. I got to be honest. I'm not sure whether they would have had them or not. I think by 1902 they probably had sight glasses of some kind.
Okay. And I see this. So talk to me about, they have the plate right here. It obviously tells you the pressure.
Yes, it'll tell you your maximum allowable working pressure, and then it displays where the top of the crown sheet is.
Now, how does the top of crown, how does this relate to the tricocks here? So as you open these,
your crown sheet is the most important. It's the part of the firebox that sits directly over the fire, so it takes the most heat and the most abuse. And it's the part that is cooled by the boiler water, so you want to make sure you have liquid water on top of it at all times. If not, you can have big problems. You'll have thermal. Well, you'll have things giving way and explosions and whatnot.
Bad things.
You want to avoid bad things. So you want to make sure you keep the top of the crown sheet covered with water, which is why most of these things are set up so that you know where the water level is in relation to the crown sheet. Usually the tricocks sit a little above it. Your sight glasses sit a little above the crown sheet. And the idea with sight glasses is you want to make sure you can see water in there. And the tricocks you would be able to watch, and with experience you'd be able to know, based on the amount of steam and or water coming out of those, where your actual water level is in the boiler.
Okay.
It can be kind of tricky because at first it looks like just steam coming out.
Right.
And then you realize it's either wetter or drier based on the conditions.
So anything else engineer-wise that you?
Not really much on the engineer side. You've got your headlight controls are up here. This one was really pretty basic as far as lights. It had some headlights. There are some class lights on this. I don't know where the switches are for those. Okay. Then,
let's say if you up top here, this mess of things. This is the main turret. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah. The main turret up there. The large valve at the top would be how you would turn on and off the turret valve to. The turret is basically where you distribute steam to all of the accessories that run off of steam pressure. The air pumps, the dynamo, which makes electricity, in this case the hydrostatic lubricator, the blower, which is where you kind of induce a draft. All those things feed off of the main turret. And so at the end of the night, you close the turret valve, beginning of the day, you open that up.
Now, walk me through, if you're the fireman, other than the fact that I know this is where you heat your lunch.
Yes, exactly.
I do know that.
Well, and you would also keep your cylinder oil, which is the oil that's fed into the actual cylinders and is therefore able to withstand the heat in there, is really, really thick. And if it gets cold, the whole saying about molasses in January also applies. So you always keep your cylinder oil container on the close to the back head to keep it warm. Okay.
And this is a hand bomber, right?
Yeah, this would be hand stoked. There's your firebox. There's the pedal to trigger that. Your fireman's going to be standing where he can hit the pedal with his or her left foot and scooping the coal from the tender into the fire where they need it.
And that's a balancing act. I've been up to the valley with you a couple times, and it's a balancing act, is it not?
It is, yeah. It's. I mean, you're using the fire and to keep the pressure where you want it, right. Because the more steam the engine uses, the more water you have to add to the boiler. Every time you add water to the boiler, you're adding cold water, you're cooling it down, so it's going to take a little of your steam pressure away. So you're kind of trying to regulate where you're putting those in terms of where they're needed and when you need to add more fuel, when you need to add more water, all that kind of stuff.
So walk me through the fireman side.
So the fireman side, we've got our fire door and our injector are the two big things the fireman's worried about. There's an injector over here, just like there is on the engineer's side. And this is how we feed water into the boiler.
And this is a lifting injector.
This is a lifting injector, yes, because it sits above the the level of water in the tender.
Gotcha.
And so it actually has to lift the water up before it can force it into the boiler.
Okay.
We've got feed for steam heat right here. This is how we regulate the pressure that's in the steam heat system. This would turn all the way on or all the way off.
And these two, this is obviously your pressure gauge?
That is your boiler pressure gauge.
Okay.
And this one, I didn't actually follow this one back.
Safe to assume this is steam heat
This
pressure?
is your steam heat pressure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It's connected there. So yeah, this is your steam heat pressure. You're depending on whether your conductor is telling you they want the train, they want more or less pressure to heat the cars more or less.
Okay. So the conductor makes that call. Then.
Yeah, the train crew the conductor and the trainman will let you know if you need to feed more or less steam to get the train warmer or cooler.
Okay.
And that's pretty much all there is out here.
That's the cab tour. So
yeah.
We'll get on the ground and we'll show you all the fun things that make this thing move.
All right.
Okay, so we are on the ground here, and Chris is going to walk us through the basics of what makes this thing move. Take it away, Chris.
All right, so these are our cylinders right here. This is where we're feeding the steam. The whole point of making the steam is we're putting the steam to work, pushing a piston back and forth, which is located in here in the rounder part of the large cylinder. This is an older engine. It has got slide valves, which are up here. The slide valves are actually what move back and forth and regulate which side of the piston you're feeding the steam to. Unlike in an internal combustion engine, we're using steam to push the piston both directions. Right. So first it's pushing the piston back. Once it reaches the back end, the setup in the valve gear has moved our valve rod to the point where the slide valve is the complete opposite direction, and then we start feeding steam into the other side of the piston on the back side and push that forward. That energy is then transmitted through our main rod down here to our driving rods on the wheels, and that's what actually provides the movement. So again, our valve gear is actually on this engine. It's got Stevenson valve gear. It's all located inside the frame, and basically it uses the motion of the engine through eccentrics to well, it turns the roundy round energy into rocking back and forth energy. And basically for every revolution of the drivers, this setup is going to rock forward and then back. And that is what's regulating the feed of the steam to the cylinders.
So it's an oscillating motion.
That's your timing. Yes.
You're basically going back and forth. And does this give you William Mason vibes, if you will?
Yeah, so well, it's Stevenson valve gear. It's the same basic valve gear. Again, it's early. Not much later than this, they started tinkering with more complicated valve gear systems like Walshers and whatnot.
Baker valve gear and all that good business.
And then we've got our power. This engine actually does have power reverse. I don't know whether it was built with it or not. I'm not sure when power reverse came about, but it probably was added after the fact.
I'd say
complete stab in the dark. But this is our power reverse. Basically, that allows us to work the valve gear without the inherent risks of having a straight out mechanical connection.
Like Mason does.
Like the Mason and some other engines where, you know, you're actually, when you move the reverser lever, you're up right against you're directly mechanically linked to the valve gear, and if you're not ready, it can throw you one way or the other.
Okay.
But the air reverse actually takes that out of the equation and allows you like a little more precise control without worrying about that, about being thrown backwards or forward, depending on when you release the latch on the reverser. I mean, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. You've got your brake shoes, you've got your spring rigging and your equalizers between them.
We talked about this before. So this is, the injector is above us, correct, here?
Yes.
And this would be...
So this is your feed from the tenders coming in here. So this is your fresh water going into your injectors. This is the overflow valve for the injector. So the whole process of the injector sometimes produces overflow. That would come out there. This engine does have a weird little setup right here. It's got a system set up to blow the sand off the rails if you're using the sand. I mean, if you use sand and you're using a lot of sand, it in theory will wear out the wheels of the train, the rest of the train, and it will wear out the rails as well. So some railroads were big on making sure you could clean that off when you're using the sand.
Okay. And you pointed out the steam heat connection back here.
Yes, and that's more visible on the other side.
Okay.
So we can pop around there and show things over there.
So we'll get on the other side, folks. Hang tight. All right, folks, we've moved over to the other side of the locomotive here, so Chris, take it away.
All right, so we've got a couple other things. This is where your blower line enters the smoke box, and that is what creates your artificial draft. When you're not working the engine, you need sometimes a little help to get the fire going, pull oxygen into it. So you turn that on, that blows a jet of steam up through the center of the exhaust stack, which pulls the draft through the fire to help your fire burn hotter. This I didn't mention on the other side. These are your snifter valves. That's your drifting valves. So when you're coasting with a steam locomotive, if you just shut off the throttle, what would happen is the movement of the piston back and forth will create a vacuum, and it will pull from the exhaust, which would normally be, normally when there's working steam through here, the steam is forcing out the exhaust after it's used. If you're not putting steam into here, you're going to get a vacuum. The vacuum will then suck the exhaust back down into the cylinders, which can do damage. So what they developed at some point is a snifter valve, and what this is, there's a tiny little valve in here. If you feed, it's operated off the throttle steam. You will, when you want to coast, you'll feed just enough steam to this setup where it actually would lift the valve, and that admits outside air into the cylinders, and it breaks the vacuum. So there's no vacuum. At that point, it's like opening up outside air into a vacuum, and it's allowing it not to be a vacuum.
Gotcha.
So you're not doing that. And you'll, basically when it does that, you'll see little puffs of steam coming from these valves, and that's how you know that they're functioning properly. As well as listening, you can hear the difference as well. These are actually your cylinder cocks. We showed that there's an air setup to control them from inside.
Wow. These are pretty large.
Yeah, those are pretty impressive, and but they're also air controlled, so there's cylinders in there that allow that to work.
Okay.
Your crosshead for your driving rods, your main rods, and then you've got your this one has a little lubricator on top to feed oil into that whole setup. You've got your air pumps here to pump up your air for your air brakes and anything else you use air for on the locomotive. And then back here, we've got, again, Trevor mentioned on the other side, the steam heat hookup, which is right here.
So walk me through, if you can. You were giving me a really good demo. How does this thing connect? There's a way to do it, right?
Well, yeah, there's these two levers right here. If you were to want to disconnect this, you'd use a hammer, tap that lever that way, tap this lever on this one that way, and then you could just pop them away from each other. So when you hook them up, you slide them back in, they can more or less settle somewhat in that range, and then you try to tap those back into place.
Okay.
It's a little tricky, but it's not impossible.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there anything else here that you can point out that you think is remarkable about this?
Nothing that's that different from anything else. You've got the hose is missing from the tender supply line, so that's your injector feed right there for your water. And there's your overflow for the injector on this side, this setup right here.
Okay.
A lot of railroads did that where they have a kind of disperses the overflow, so it's not focused down at one point.
Okay. And this large, are we guessing this is the blowdown guy right here in the middle? This.
Oh, that is. I honestly do not know what that is connected to a weird setup on the front of the mud ring of the firebox. Okay. I'm not 100% sure what it is. It's something that's unusual, but I don't know what it is. So.
All good. Cool. Is there anything else you think?
Not really. That's pretty much the basics. It's a pretty simple machine, fairly early. It's attractive. It's well proportioned. It's a nice little engine, and must have been fairly simple to operate as far as they go.
Yeah, no stoker, no any kind of craziness like that going on. So pretty simple machine. So, Chris, thanks for coming out and sharing your knowledge with us, because this is a lot of fun. So stay tuned for a little bit more history. So, the year is 1952, and 377 behind me has been condemned along with 378. And so she's sitting at a scrap line in Clifton Forge, Virginia. But our story does not end here, and this is where it gets good. This is that twist of fate I talked about in the opening. What happens is the town of Logan, West Virginia, little town, okay, maybe medium-sized town, phones up, writes, whatever they do back then, probably writes, the C&O, and says, hey, we're looking for a locomotive and a consist of cars to help us celebrate our centennial of our beloved town. C&O says, actually, you know what? We have just the thing for you. And what happens is they save 377 behind me. They bring her back to life. She probably goes through what we would now call 1472 day, make sure, you know, boiler's up to spec and running gear, it's in good shape, etc., etc. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting, especially here at the museum. It is put together along with a 1915 built hopper from the Sandy River and Elkhorn Railroad, which is essentially a subsidiary of the C&O, as well as a caboose and a combine that ran on the Craig Valley branch, number 409. And this became this display train. So it goes out to Logan, West Virginia. It does its thing and for the centennial. But again, 377 doesn't end there. The story does not end. And because it's back under steam now, there's some really great photos I found of it in Richmond, Virginia, at the Richmond station, somewhere in Richmond, I assume near the main terminal there, with the C&O, which is really Hocking Valley Railroad 409 combine behind it, and it's there as a display. And so this is in 1966, and it was for the National Railroad Historical Society's convention that they had going on at that time. So pretty neat stuff. So it's 1966, 377 is still it's still around. And eventually, as that time for her ends in 1969, she goes off to a little short line operation in Toledo, Ohio to be used on their operation. And she does some fun stuff. And then in 1971, the consist I just mentioned, 377 behind me, the combine 409, and the Sandy River and Elkhorn hopper, as well as a C&O caboose, all come right here to the B&O Railroad Museum. They are donated by the C&O, and it is here that those items will live. Now, I don't know whatever happened to the caboose. That has, maybe it was, I don't know. I don't even want to surmise because I don't know. But if you go into the B&O Railroad Museum's front yard, you can still see that 1915 hopper car, the Sandy River and Elkhorn. Now, yeah, it's painted up to be B&O, but it's there to represent a B&O. But for all of you rail fans and history lovers in the audience, that is the actual one that came along with 377 behind me. And you can still see that combine, number 409. It was a Jim Crow car back in the day, so there were segregated sections, you know, for African Americans and the whites. And what's really great is that's in the roundhouse, and you can walk through that now, 409. And what I also find interesting is you can still see 377. She's mostly in the North Car Shop. Now, granted, she's outside right now for our Polar Express event, but this is something you can still come here and see and enjoy and soak up the rich history that 377 brings us. And what I like most is that 377 for me is the quintessential branch line locomotive. Like when you think branch line locomotive, I don't know, you look at 377, you go, I think that fits the bill. It's just a neat little thing. And I'll add one little cool little historical bit here is when it was refurbished for the Logan, West Virginia Centennial, this is where we get the headlight behind me, which is an old school oil burning headlight, you know, kerosene burning headlight. This was not original to, this is not what she had when she worked out of Clifton Forge. And the stars on the cylinder covers also come about at this time, and there was a cap stack, or a stack cap, that had a very British looking, but unfortunately that's gone. Who knows where that went, but, and you can see that in those photos of it in Richmond, Virginia. So this is what it would have looked like over time, and especially on its post revenue time serving the C&O. So if you've been a fan of this channel for any length of time, or perhaps you're new here, something you should probably know about me is that I am a junkie for books. As a history major, I love this stuff. And as a history professor of mine years ago taught me, you must cite your sources. Something I will tell you that I really got some good information out of for the making of this episode about 377 was the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway's Craig Valley branch here by Thomas W. Dixon. Thomas W. Dixon is the founder of the C&O Historical Society down there in Clifton Forge, and he is a swath of knowledge. It's just unending. I love it. This was written in 1991. It's very, I'd say, concise. It's short, it's very thin, but it gave me some great information about 377 and 378 and kind of the overall view, the big picture view of the Craig Valley branch. Now, if you really want to get into the weeds on 377, 378, as well as the structures, the rail, the how the line operated, etc., I would highly recommend the Chesapeake and Ohio's Craig Valley branch, compiled by Al Kress, Chuck McIntyre, and Dave Ostrander. This was published by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway Historical Society, and this was published, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe 2024 was when it was done. I don't know right off the top of my head. But this was phenomenal. This gives you that real close view. This is more like the 1,000-foot view. This is more like the 40,000-foot view. And both of these together are really good reads. If 377 is what you love, or just you want to learn more about the branch lines of the C&O had in its time, check both of these sources out and get out there and purchase these books. Don't steal them wherever it is that you go to get your books. So we've proved that you can be extraordinary just by being ordinary. 377 here is living proof of that. So come down here to the B&O Railroad Museum, come out and see 377 for yourself. Most of the time she's in the North Car Shop, and go inside of the roundhouse. Have a look-see at that 409 combine from the Hocking Valley. And go up front, in the front yard, have a look-see at the Sandy River and Elkhorn. All three pieces came here together. They were just that little twist of fate in 1952 from Logan, West Virginia. That's all it took. And that big shout out to my buddy Chris France. Man, thanks for coming out and showing me and giving us a great walk around as to 377 and what makes her move. Chris has just a great experience with these things. He's run plenty of them, and I always learn something new from him whenever he and I talk railroads and steam, etc., etc. So thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. And so this is Trevor from History on the Move. Get out there, read history, explore history, and more importantly, make your own history. I'll see you on the next one.